Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of the OBX Wave Report. This edition, we are going to head a little bit farther afield. We're going to move away from the coastline and cross the globe to a place of the world that is also vulnerable to climate change. Here on the Outer Banks, we engage in surfing. We are taking a journey together as we improve our surfing. And in this journey, we observe both the effects of weather and the natural world on the Outer Banks and the effects of climate change driven by fossil fuel burning. We're living out here on the edge. And just like a surfer that's starting to launch on a wave, that's starting to transition into the pop-up position, we're trying to pop up our awareness of climate change and the need for response. And we're, in many cases, in most cases, doing this from the glassed deck of a surfboard. And this will be the case more and more, hopefully, as we go, where we're building the methods to do this as we improve as surfers. But every now and again, we're going to take our perspective away from the surf specifically, and we're going to look at an extreme climate event that is occurring in the world. And this is the case right now with South America, in Chile and Argentina specifically, and in parts of Brazil as well. And as we think about Chile and Argentina, we have seen a spate of news reports about extreme heat and wildfires in the region that has caused billions and billions of dollars in likely damage, driven millions from their homes as wildfires have engulfed large portions of the region, and as severe drought and heat and very severe heat specifically has racked both the forests and the farms in this region. So let's talk about causes and influences. And in the first part of this exploration of causes and influences, we're going to try and pull back the veil, if you will, on the global climate system and the way weather works around the world, and see what kind of weather features and natural variability features enable the heat, and how climate change turns what would tend to be a milder variance into a monstrous extreme. And when we say climate change, we mean climate change driven by fossil fuel burning. We mean climate change on the side of heat. We mean greenhouse gases injected into the atmosphere by combustion engines that burn the fossil fuels and turn them into carbon dioxide primarily that heats the atmosphere. So that's what we mean when we mean climate change. So let's look at natural variability first. This is a cycle in the global climate system that occurs every 3 to 5 years or so. And right now I'm looking at a ocean surface temperature anomaly map that is aimed at the equatorial Pacific. And as we look at the equatorial Pacific, we see these blues showing up. And what that indicates generally is that the surface temperatures across the equatorial Pacific are cooler than normal in this anomaly map. The anomaly map shows variance from the climate norm. And so when we see these blues in the Pacific, we know that the equatorial Pacific is cooler than normal. And the Pacific goes through these cycles of cooler than normal in the equatorial regions and than normal in the equatorial regions. And this is the cycle, this is a natural cycle that occurs called INSO. And this is the transition. And this variance has been happening for as long as we know, at least in the present climate state, which has lasted for thousands of years. And it is a feature of the Earth system and is a feature that has an effect on global weather. So what happens when the equatorial Pacific cools is that weather systems around the world are influenced by that change in temperature across such a large region of ocean. And the reason is because this region of ocean is huge. And when temperatures change there, it's so huge that it nudges weather systems around. And so in the case of La Nina, what tends to happen is that weather changes a bit around the world. And so in the December to February timeframe, this is a map provided by NOAA. You can tend to see these changes around the world with the La Nina in the Pacific tends to be warmer up here in parts of Alaska and Canada, warmer over Japan, warmer over parts of South Asia, warmer over parts of Australia. And then looking over here towards South America, tends to be a bit warmer over parts of South America as well. And so we've got that influence, which tends to be relatively mild, right? Occasionally, La Nina can produce some extremes, but for the most part, the nudges to the climate system by La Nina are generally relatively mild. But then we got this other thing that's going on. This is the new guy on the climate scene. See, La Nina is like the old guy, and I mean I'm using the word guy just why don't we just call it the new they? Let's make this a gender non-specific thing. Okay. So La Nina is the new they I'm sorry, La Nina is the old they on the climate system, but there's a new they that has come onto the scene, and this new they is a bit of a monster. And the new thing, we'll just call it a thing. How about that? The new thing on the scene is climate change, is the heating of the atmosphere driven by fossil fuel burning. And so this new thing coming in kind of grabs the old thing, which was La Nina, and twists it. It has like kind of a torquing influence on La Nina. And so what would tend to be a mild influence, or at least a milder influence, becomes more extreme. And so if you get a range of warming in certain regions of the world because of La Nina, that warming gets extra. It gets something a little extra. It gets like that extra sting of heat. And that extra sting of heat driven by the extra heat trapped in the atmosphere can turn something that would be a mild influence before into a monstrous influence. So the new thing, global heating driven by fossil fuel burning, is doing exactly that in Chile and Argentina right now. And we're seeing some very, very extreme events as a result. So let's just be crystal clear. La Nina is the old thing. It's the normal thing. But La Nina is now interacting with a monster on the scene called climate change and is creating an extreme event. And the extra heat in the atmosphere is the thing that is causing this. Now, how do we know? Well, we know because the experts that analyze the climate are telling us. And one of the expert organizations is Carbon Brief, and they use models and scientific expertise and data to determine the fingerprint of climate change on extreme events. And so what's going on in Chile and in South America right now has actually been going on for a few months in spates and spurts, right? And so we had one spurt back there in December, and Carbon Brief did a study on extreme weather related to climate change in Argentina. And they found that Argentina's record-breaking 2022 heat wave was made 60 times more likely by climate change driven by fossil fuel burning. Now, 60 times is not a little thing. That's like, I don't know, what is that? So, like, if it's 100% more likely, it's what, two times more likely? So, I mean, 60 times more likely is like what, 3,000% more likely? Am I doing my math right? But in any case, the number here is so huge that you can't argue with it. It's the influence is so big that you can't say, oh, well, maybe it's just La Nina. Because in a normal world, La Nina wouldn't produce this event 59 out of 60 times. And we see this again and again and again with extreme weather events. It's not just this particular event in Chile and Argentina. It's happening again and again and again across the world. There's this rip in the climate system, this tear, this fast movement, this hole that has been torn into it that makes something like this extreme event, 60 times more likely. And that's what the scientists are saying. So what do we see? From the air, we see this massive extent of wildfires that has caused millions, literally millions of people to flee. And I mean, it looks like a war zone because it is. The heat in the atmosphere, driven by fossil fuel burning, has gone to war, in this case, against the people of Chile. And hundreds of homes have been lost as a result, and millions have been displaced. And there are people that freak out, about people coming across the border to the United States for help. And they freak out and they try and demonize those who are fleeing things like this war driven by fossil fuel burning, this war on us, on all of us living on the earth. And I would say that the hate here is displaced. The immigrants, the people that are fleeing this, they are not our enemies. They come here to try and make a better life, fleeing devastation and dictatorship in many cases, but also devastation. And should we not also open our hearts to them and their plight, which is also our plight? Should we also not name the cause, fossil fuel burning, of what's going on in the climate system? As the scientists have let us know very clearly, let's not kill the messengers or the victims. Let's deal with the problem here. And this is what we see. This is what we see. We see these fires raging across Chile. It's happening. It's happening now. And it's yet one more flashing red light in the system, in the climate system that we all live in. It's one more cry for help from the global community, help in the form of action, responsible action. Let's look at this in another way. Let's look at this from the point of view of heat. All right. I had a wave model up there. I don't know why. This should be a heat model, but here we go. Let's look at this in the form of heat. Let's look at this in the form of temperature. I'm focusing in on South America. I've shown you the aerial pictures of the vast extent of wildfires here in Chile. But let's look at the heat, getting down to the surface. Right now, in parts of Chile and Argentina, the temperatures are 109 degrees Fahrenheit. This is one of many days in which temperatures have been this hot. And it's been just going on and on and on. This over a region that is forested, a region very similar in latitude to our Gulf Coast region here in the United States. 109 degrees Fahrenheit, day after day after day after day. That heat baking the lands, the forests. Heat. Heat driven by fossil fuel burning. Coming up as a peak, enhanced by climate change, a peak that would never have gotten so high without that fossil fuel burning, a peak that would have probably been generated by La Nina, but that might have been in the 90s, for example, instead. But when you get those temperatures peaking out into the extremes, into 20 degrees hotter or more, I mean, in Rio de Janeiro, they had a heat index of 122 degrees. And when that happens day after day after day, well, the lands and the farms and the forests, and in many cases the people, can't handle it. You get too extreme, it's just a matter of degree. You know, everything has its limits, its space. And it's not just this one hot spot in the 109 degree Fahrenheit range. I mean, we've got this huge swath. I mean, what we've got? We got 102 here up to the north. We got 105 down near the coastline. 103 again near the coastline. 104. It's just this huge region covering thousands of square miles. Every day, day after day after day, baked. I mean, it's hotter there than it is in the Sahara Desert during the peak of its own heat. I mean, here in the Sahara, it's like 104, 101. We're talking Death Valley type temperatures over a region thousands of square miles across, a region that's not used to that kind of heat. Day after day after day after day. And that's what's happening. That's what's happening in Chile. That's what happened in Argentina. And that's what's happening in South America right now, driven by climate change. That's what I talk about when I talk about my concern about extremes here in the Outer Banks, because we've got our own set of issues to contend with. We've got increasingly frequent, more powerful nor'easters and hurricanes. And that's what we stare down the pipe at here in the Outer Banks as far as extreme events riled by human-caused climate change. That on top of sea level rise driven by melting glaciers. But it's not just sea level rise and hurricanes and nor'easters. It's also heat and fire. It just depends on where you live. So as I end this special edition of the OBX Wave Report today, I'm going to end with this headline article by the Foreign Policy that was recently published about the heat in Chile, in Argentina, and Uruguay that focuses in on the impacts, billions of dollars, the severe human impact right now, the displacement, the loss of homes. And let's just think about this title. Climate change looms behind South America's heat wave. Catherine Osborne. Dry heat has worsened deadly forest fires in Chile and caused expensive droughts in Argentina's and Uruguay's agricultural sectors. That's the headline. And lurking behind that is the fossil fuel burning. Lurking behind that is the need to rapidly transition to clean energy. Lurking behind that is the fact that if we don't, these kinds of things are going to happen with increased frequency, and they're going to get worse. So thank you for joining me for this special edition, this special session of the OBX Wave Report. I encourage you to read the article by Catherine Osborne. I encourage you to read the article by Carbon Brief, written by Aisha Tandon. And I encourage you to follow Carbon Brief and learn more about the climate system and learn more about their climate modeling and the good work of the IPCC and of other scientists around the world. And I encourage you to help, you know, not to hate, not to fear, but to see with clear eyes the trouble that we could avoid and confront and make a better world because of it. So thank you for joining me for this special session of the OBX Wave Report. And we'll be back with you shortly for a product review. We're going to go get a little less serious and a little bit more surf gear focused. I'm going to review a pair of O'Neill booties, which have really helped keep my feet warm in the winter North Atlantic. Even though the winter North Atlantic is warmer than normal, it's still cold enough to make me cold, which doesn't mean that, you know, climate change has stopped. Just because it is still a little cold, of course, doesn't mean that climate change has stopped. But in any case, I'm going to get back to some surf stuff, and we're going to do some product reviews, and then we'll get on down to the coastline and get some wave observations for today. So, but thank you again for joining me for this special report, and please do everything you can to help support the science and the clean energy transition both.